Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, March 31st, 2025. Ray McGovern will be here with us in just a minute on President Putin's rather remarkable and utterly candid speech to some of his troops in a submarine. But first, this.
Markets are at an all-time high. Euphoria has set in. The economy seems unstoppable, but the last administration has buried us so deep in debt and deficits, it's going to take a lot of digging to get us out of this hole. Are you prepared? Lear Capital specializes in helping people like me and you grow and protect our wealth with gold. Did you know that during Trump's last presidency, gold rose 54% to a record high? If that happens again, that puts gold at $4,200 an ounce in his next term. Don't wait. Do what I did. Call Lear at 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com for your free gold ownership kit and special report, $4,200 gold ahead. When you call, ask how you can also get up to $15,000 in bonus gold with a qualifying purchase. Call 800-511-4620, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeNap.com and tell them the judge sent you.
Ray McGovern, good morning. Welcome here, my dear friend. I do want to talk to you at some length on the significance of what President Putin has been saying lately, both to a group of businessmen and to sailors aboard a submarine. But before we do, a couple of other questions, if you don't mind, on the topics that are making the rounds this morning. Do you think that the European elites are preparing for war with Russia?
I think they're doing the military industrial complex's bidding and trying to get their economies back in shape. And the way they do that is traditionally prepare for war. Problem is that once they get all those tanks built, they're going to have to use them, or they'll replace them, and so it's kind of a ruse they're using to stay in power. They're on very slippery ground. Their social benefits are going way down. They're all going to be thrown out pretty soon. They're just trying to delay the day when that comes.
So Alistair Crook and I were speaking this morning about the difference between building a tank and building a car. You build a tank. If you don't use it, you gain nothing by it. If you do use it, you're destroying somebody else's property. You build a car, and it can be used to generate wealth. It can get somebody to work. It can be used to deliver products and services and goods. This is economics 101. This is not any advanced theory.
Sure it is.
Don't van der Leyen and Starmer and Macron understand this?
They're way out on a limb, Judge, and they think that they can use Zelensky to kind of save them. In other words, they want to appear the saviors of Ukraine. Putin is in position not to let that happen. And as soon as Trump learns a little better, and I understand Trump ended up yesterday by saying, yeah, we're going to talk again, Putin and I. As long as he understands a little better what's going on in Ukraine and in Europe, to a lesser extent in Europe, because they're pretty much strap hangers. So they're pretty much sidelined. And although they are building up their own economies and trying to save their economies by going on a war footing, it's not going to come to a very good end, that's for sure. And I think they'll be sensible enough not to tweet the Russian bear to the point where they go to war with Russia. I can't believe that that's more than just rhetoric.
As of last night, the so-called president of peace had bombed a defenseless country 10,000 miles away 65 times in 48 hours. To what end? Pepe Escobar's lucky he got out of there alive.
Well, because Netanyahu wants them to do it. I mean, it's really, really simple. Trump is doing his bidding. He's trying to bail Netanyahu out when Netanyahu is in very, very very strange and difficult circumstances. That's the only reason. And the Houthis are an example of defiance, and actually a very bizarre example of people who consider principle paramount. In other words, they don't want the Palestinians to be genocided, and they are being genocided. And the Houthis feel a certain affinity and solidarity with them, which, to my amazement, the major Arab countries do not feel, or are so bribed by the United States in economic terms that they can't do what they should do in supporting, as the Houthis and Ansar Allah is doing. In other words, they're not supporting them the way they should.
What is your take, big picture, before we get into some of the specifics of what he said, of President Putin's speeches in the past week? One to a group of businessmen and one to a group of sailors aboard a submarine. We'll start with the latter. Putin addresses his troops.
Yeah, this is a big deal, Judge. What he talked about was a whole slew of things. Let me go through just some of the major points. There he is with the Supreme Commander of the Navy. He says, look, things are going really good in Ukraine. I'll tell you briefly, we're doing it gradually, not as quickly as some would like. Oh, isn't that interesting? In other words, Putin is admitting there are lots of people in Russia itself which would, come on, get on with this thing. You can do it. Why don't you go faster? Now, what else? Okay. He said, we agreed in Istanbul, 6 weeks after the war started, on denazification. He puts that before demilitarization, and that's significant. The head of the negotiation from Ukraine, initial disagreement, and it included denazification. Okay? Now, I mentioned yesterday, or I guess it was Friday when we were doing the roundtable, that with respect to relations with the United States, Putin was very upfront, saying, quote, I would like to say first that, in my opinion, the newly elected president of the United States sincerely wants to end this conflict for a number of reasons, such I won't go into right now. There are many of them. But in my opinion, this is a sincere desire. Now, that puts Putin way out on a limb, okay? I trust, they're talking about trust now after what they regard with some reason as a series of betrayals. So either he's feeling that he's got this whole thing under control, or he's just bragging, and there are people within Russia who would second guess that and say, look, it may be your opinion, Vladimir Vladimirovich, but it's not our opinion. You need more than trust. You have to have the goods. And that's when Putin goes into the major thing about whether he has a legitimate, whether Zelensky has a legitimate government. And of course, this is not the first time that Putin said, no, it's not legitimate. And neither are all the people that he's appointed. They're all illegitimate. Worse still, the Nazis are back in power. He makes that very clear. He points out, look, in 2017, the U.S. Congress said the Azov Battalion, a bunch of Nazis, and you couldn't give any aid to them. 2017. Oh, that was my term, Trump's reign, right? So he says, look, the Nazis are the problem, and you got to address denazification in a very severe way. And that means that you can't negotiate with a figurehead who is run by the Nazis. That's what he says. Okay, so what do you do? I got an idea, he says. We'll go to the UN. We'll have the UN involved. And curiously enough, Wang Yi, Chinese foreign minister, is due in Moscow next week. I do believe they're going to put some substance behind this proposal, that the UN come in, as it has done in situations like Serbia and East Timor, and kind of sort of envelop this thing so there can be a ceasefire, and there can be real negotiations, not with the Nazis, but with the people that come in and are able to arrange real real elections first, and then negotiations with people who are rightfully and juridically in power. That's a tall order. It takes a long time.
You, Ray. Here's President Trump critical of Putin, and then we'll listen to these actual words which you've just so nicely summarized. So, Chris, cut number 9.
And I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that, but I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for them.
I don't think President Putin could care less about tariffs or more sanctions. And I think President Trump is either pretending to be unaware or is truly unaware of how well Russia has prospered under the sanctions. But getting back to what President Putin said, here's the core of what he said. It's a very, very articulate explanation. Cut number 15.
The current civil authorities in Ukraine have no legitimacy in accordance with the country's constitution. Ukraine has held no presidential election, while according to the constitution, all key officials are to be appointed by the president, including regional government bodies, governors, and so on. So if the president is illegitimate, so are all the others. So under these circumstances of de facto illegitimacy, neo-Nazi formations receive additional weapons and recruit new personnel. What does this lead to? What could it lead to? It results in de facto power being in their hands. This in turn means that it is already unclear with whom to sign documents and what effect such documents might carry. For tomorrow, new leaders may come to power through elections and declare, "We do not know who signed those papers, so goodbye." The issue is not just this uncertainty, it is that these neo-Nazi formations, such as Azov, among others, are effectively beginning to run the country. This raises the question, how is it possible to conduct negotiations with them? In such situations, international practice follows a well-established path. Within the framework of the United Nations peacekeeping operations, there have been several cases of what is termed external governance or temporary administration. This occurred in East Timor, I believe in 1999, in parts of the former Yugoslavia, and in New Guinea. In short, such precedents exist.
Boy, I think he's got a terrific handle on what's going on there. That is a brilliant, in my view, and lucid explanation of the dangers of negotiating with Volodymyr Zelensky. Your thoughts, Ray?
I think when they talk, probably later this week, Putin will have a chance to school Trump on what's really happened here, and to persuade Trump, and the evidence is legion, that the Nazis are really in control. The Nazis, aided and abetted by MI6, the British intelligence service. One sidelight here is that to the degree Trump succeeds in declassifying all those Russiagate documents, it will show that the British were involved deeply in all this stuff from the very outset, and they tried to do Trump in before he became elected, and then cooperated in the effort of Russiagate. So the British and the Nazis are together here, and here is Putin trying to find a third way, okay? And as I say, I fully expect the Chinese Wang Yi, the foreign minister, very adept with Lavrov in Moscow next week, to be putting together a little package that they'll surface at the UN Security Council, a package that makes good sense, eminent good sense, and has some promise of circumventing this business about denazification.
Right.
You remember that from the very outset, Putin said, look, we have a twin aim in this special military operation. Demilitarization, that's about done. Denazification, that's worse. So that's why he's focusing on this. And with respect to moving toward the Dnieper or finishing off the job, I just can't omit this passage of what he told those sailors, what's happening today, it is very clear. Along the entire line of contact, our troops have a strategic initiative. I just recently said, we will finish them off, period. Okay. There are reasons to believe that we will finish them off. I only think that the Ukrainian people should realize what is happening, what this means to them. So they are finishing them off. That's the background here. That's the context. They're in no rush, and they're saying, "Look, Mr. Trump, this is going to drag on for another year." Witness the fact that
the emotional difference between them is remarkable. Putin and Trump. Putin is immensely patient, and Trump is immensely impatient. I mean, this is obvious to a school child, much less those of us.
Yeah, he's not getting his way, And when one of the Russian negotiators in Saudi Arabia made a statement just 2 days ago, saying, this is going on for a year or more. I mean, this is really difficult, and these things are not intractable, but it's going to take a really long time. Kurasin is his name. Well, that pissed Trump off, to use his expression. Right. When he gets a little real, when hopefully real analysts show him that the reality here is that he's got no cards on the battlefield, and that to the degree he can recognize the problem with the Nazis, well, that's got to be addressed. And this is one imaginative. Now, Putin said, this is not the only way we could do this, but this is new. Let's consider it. So there's a new proposal on the table. I hope it gets some lift by people who really matter in the world.
Here's President Putin on Ukraine elections. Chris, cut number 14.
In principle, it would indeed be possible to discuss, under UN auspices, with the United States and even European countries, and certainly with our partners and allies, the possibility of establishing a temporary administration in Ukraine. To what end? To conduct democratic elections, to bring to power a competent government that enjoys public trust, and only then to begin negotiations on a peace treaty and sign legitimate agreements that would be recognized worldwide as consistent and reliable.
I don't get it. Trump is, quote, pissed off, to use his phrase, at President Putin's challenging the legitimacy of Vladimir Zelensky. Trump threw not physically, threw Vladimir Zelensky out of the White House because he had the temerity to challenge him and to challenge Vice President Vance. And now Trump comes to his defense. Putin, in my opinion, makes a perfectly valid moral and legal argument that it would be crazy to negotiate with this guy when he's going to be replaced by the hardliners because he's negotiating with us.
Well, again, the British and the Nazis are working hand in glove. The primary contender to take over for Zelensky happens to be Zelensky, okay? And what is he? He's Ukrainian ambassador in London. They're grooming him. But Putin is not going to have any part of that. So what we have here is a kind of a deal where Trump's got to realize that just because he four-putted the 18th green, for God's sake, he's not allowed to be pissed off at Putin. That's what it comes to. That was Sunday after the golf game with Lindsey Graham and the Finnish president urging Trump to do the kinds of things that Trump is trying to not do with respect to Putin. So the saving grace is Putin's in no hurry. He's saying, look, we can finish him off anytime we want. And that's true, okay? And so his negotiator is saying, could take a year. And what does that require? That requires Trump to recognize the realities here and try to help do something about denazification, because that is worse than it was back in 2022. And there is a way to do that. UN is just one good proposal, in my view.
We started out this conversation by my asking you if the European elites are preparing for war with Russia. And we all know that they are. As our mutual friend Gerald Salenti says, when all else fails, they take you to war. President Putin is not ignorant of that, but he's willing to talk to the Europeans and said so in this clip. Chris, cut number 13.
We are prepared to work with Europe as well, despite their inconsistent behavior and constant attempts to lead us up the garden path. Nevertheless, we have grown accustomed to this. I trust we will avoid making mistakes rooted in excessive trust towards our so-called partners. But in general, they have a problem over there, which is never highlighted, just mentioned in passing. I am highlighting it. What is it? Ultra-nationalists have had considerable influence in Ukraine from the start, in fact, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. These people hold openly neo-Nazi views, and they even use the term in Ukraine, so we were not the ones who invented it. Curiously, few people mention this now either.
Few people mention this now.
I'm glad, Judge, that you chose that translation, because there's an erroneous translation which says, Putin, I hope that we don't fall afoul of, I hope that we don't get conned again. That's pretty much what he says. But the word in Russian is nadеюсь, and the word means really, I expect, or as this translator did, I trust that we're not going to get conned again, okay? That's big, okay? Because that's what he was accused of, rightfully so, for 8 years as he sat back and depended on the Germans and the French to monitor the Minsk Accords. That's not going to happen again. So
Right.
He's saying, I trust this is not going to happen again. He's not saying, I hope this is not going to happen again, because the pressure is on him. And he doesn't really have to move very fast. All he has to do is a trit and a trit and a trit. And there's a major offensive coming in May, I think. The Russians will go all the way to the Dnieper, and then it'll be a new situation. And Trump might be encouraged to deal now rather than then.
Ray McGovern, a pleasure chatting with you, my dear man. Thank you for your knowledge of all this and your unique knowledge of the nuances of Russian grammar. Very, very helpful and fascinating. All the best. We'll see you again Friday with that youngster, Larry Johnson, for the Intelligence Community Roundtable. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure. And the aforementioned youngster, Larry Johnson, will be here at 11:30 this morning and at 4 this afternoon from Rome. I inadvertently said he was in Beijing. He was in Beijing last week. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.